In today's video, we have a few upgrades for the Onefinity, along with even a downgrade. We're also going to replace the wasteboard and clean up this disaster down here. This video will essentially be a vlog of me tearing apart the Onefinity and putting it back together. And then towards the end, I'll give an update on the Onefinity Elite and what I've had going on with that machine. And as you can see, this whole area has just been neglected. All that fine dust is collected under there, scraps, other kind of junk. So I just need to take the time and give it a good reset. The magnets will stay because they're great and I highly recommend them. I was pretty impressed with how many scraps and just other random things I managed to stuff underneath here, and we're not gonna let that happen again. First things first, we gotta remove the spindle. This is just a Huyang spindle off Amazon, and it's actually been a pretty good spindle. Setup kind of sucked, but overall it's treated me well, and we are gonna upgrade to a different spindle here, which I'll talk about later. And if you are looking into one of these cheaper spindles, you will have to do some soldering and programming of the VFD. I think it took me roughly 4 hours or so to set it up, versus companies like Pwn, where you pay the extra money and it just comes set up and plug and play. A Makita router is just fine, as I've had one for the first several years of my CNC journey, but a spindle is a pretty nice upgrade. And now onto the reason this whole thing even started. I'm taking my Onefinity Journeyman and turning it back into a Woodworker. And the reason I'm doing that is because I have an Elite Foreman, and I just don't need another large machine, as that thing is 48 by 48, so regaining some shop space will be pretty nice. And that's another reason I love Onefinity, because that is an option. I can simply swap out this rail and get a smaller machine, or vice versa. Along with these Craig benches, I'm a big fan of these Craig benches, and as you can see, we're just gonna tear this one down and change the rails, and then just make this a little bit smaller and cut down the previous sheets, and we'll have a brand new bench. I currently have 5 of these Craig benches in my shop, so I actually just bought another set of rails and wheels, and that will make 6 Craig benches in my shop. You could definitely build a bench, but by the time you buy materials or factor in the time to make it, it's just not worth it for me, and I honestly just like the look of them, and now that I have several, I just kind of want them all to match. And I get asked all the time, are they rigid enough? And for me, they are. I do a lot of stuff and I really haven't had any issue. Sure, if you give it a big shake, it does move a little bit, but if you add these pieces of plywood on the side along with these cross members, it's plenty rigid enough for me and my needs. Ideally, I guess you could spend a couple $100 more and have someone weld you one, but I just think it's a little bit overkill. And then I just notch out these 2x4s, they slide in pretty nice to prevent the plywood and wasteboard from sagging, which is a must. Then I just attach everything with screws, and it's pretty straightforward. I will be keeping wheels in this one, as it's nice to be able to move it around and sweep around it and stuff like that, but on the Elite Foreman, I would recommend not using wheels just because that's such a big, heavy unit. It's been a while since I put together a machine, so this was actually a little bit exciting. I've had a Onefinity since they even became a company. I had one of the 3rd ever made beta machines, which my friend still has and uses to this day, and a lot of the parts are 3D printed. So just to see how far they come is pretty cool. And then Onefinity sent me this Woodworker rail with a stiffy on it, and I'm gonna send back the Journeyman rail in that original box. And ooh, it feels good to regain some space, but don't look at the mess. Don't look at the mess. To get some help to stuff this thing back in the box, I sent back the rail, some extra parts I had laying around, and a gift. So they better enjoy it. And on to putting together the actual machine. This is pretty simple. I could probably do this in like 15 minutes at this point. I just put a screw in one foot, I slide the rail all the way forward, make sure those are even, put another screw in, slide it all the way back, and then snug everything down. And this is the slider off the last machine, so we're just gonna put this thing back on there and clean it off. And this is the new spindle. I said I was gonna talk about it later, but I realized I can't, so that's all you're gonna get. I got this drag chain set up from Route 1 on Etsy, and I had to modify it to fit my last design, so we're gonna have to modify it again to fit this design, since I kind of changed it up to fit the Foreman. Journeyman, dang it. And I went from a water-cooled spindle to an air-cooled spindle, which I'll make a video comparing the two once I can talk about this spindle and why I went back to this route. So for this video, we're just gonna kind of cut it short at that and talk about how I'm gonna fix this disaster up here. And this is just a hodgepodge of brackets that I've kind of put together over the years. This is pre-3D print days, but we have 3D printers now, and I have a lot of them. So what I'm gonna do is just make my own combination of these two mounts here, so I don't really have to change anything on the top of the CNC. So I went on lunch, quickly modeled that, and got that printing. It took like 2 hours, and while we wait on that, we'll get this all put back together. And what's nice about not having a water-cooled system is I don't gotta worry about those dang water-cooled hoses. And this is how I had it mounted on the last setup, and it worked pretty good. It relatively kept the dust off of it and out of it, but that's a pretty hard thing to do. And then we're just gonna drill a hole in here. I almost broke my wrist twice using this big bit, but we got it done. And then we're just gonna run the 2 power supplies in through the back of the machine like so. I have this set up on 2 circuits. One is for the spindle itself, and then I have the dust collector and the CNC on its own breaker, which can cause problems if you're running a shop vac. I personally haven't had issues with EMI, but it can be a big culprit and cause a lot of headaches. So be aware what you're plugging into the same circuit as the CNC. And now to home the machine and make sure everything works properly, which it appears it does. And one thing I wish the Elite Foreman had was an Xbox controller. Ooh, I love the Xbox controller. And since we swapped out the X-axis, I need to hop in here and change a few numbers, which is pretty simple to do. You can figure out how to do this in the Onefinity forum or as customer service. Which apparently I should have done myself because I set the limit way too small and the revolutions were off, but that's a quick fix and we'll get back in there and make it right. And after a quick facepalm, we're back in business, everybody. Slow it down to make sure it doesn't crash and ugga into the wall, and ooh, perfection. And back to my janky drag chain and dust collection hose setup. Here's the new one, and guess what? Just not quite there. I probably could have forced it in, but I didn't want to break it, so I'm just gonna bust out the torch and heat it up, as it was pretty close, but not perfect, and if I just warm it up, it should slide right in. And that it did. A little bit of heat did the trick. Now to contain these cables. There's a little groove on the bottom, and you just tighten it down, and it holds everything snug and in place. And then a zip tie to hold this cable in place, and as you can tell, I absolutely fell in love with 3D printing. It took me about a half hour to design this new piece and about 2 hours to print it, and I had the exact piece I wanted for like, I don't know, less than $1. And then I was trying to decide what to do with this drag chain. I had the coolant hoses on the last machine running through this, and the X and the Y cables were just too short, so I couldn't really run them through. So I decided to just ditch it completely and just add a couple zip ties and just make it look nice. It doesn't really get in the way at all. If the cables were longer, I would have ran it through the drag chain, but it is what it is. And then here's a quick shot of the piece I designed and made. I think this was a combination of Rowdy Roman's and Route 1's pieces. I just combined them into one, and I got it first try, so it works perfect for me. So now that we got everything set up, I put a V-bit in here, and we're just gonna mark the entire cut area and then put the old wasteboard back on. I don't really want to make a whole new one, so we're just going to make what I have work. Until that one's junk, then I'll just redo the entire thing. I also have a bunch of videos on how I do my wasteboard and stuff like that, so if you want a more in-depth approach, check out those videos. And then as I just mentioned, we're just marking the whole area. I'll mark each corner with this V-bit and just get it roughly. It doesn't need to be perfect, I just needed to know the cutting area of the whole machine. And then I did need to make a few modifications to my dust collector. The last setup, this was sticking out a couple feet. I just didn't need it that long in this setup, so I just cut off a bunch of it, and this is good enough. As long as it doesn't crash into it when it's in this back right corner, it's fine. And then I'll just use T-track as a straight edge to give me an area to reference when I put the new, well, old wasteboard back on there. My wasteboard setup and thoughts haven't changed much. I just like it very simple, because if I gotta replace these sheets, it's just not a bunch of messing around. Then I just cut that edge piece to the right width and added these grooves to hold the T-track down, so if you over tighten clamps or jigs, it won't pull out the screws out of the baseboard. I don't use clamps to hold down any work pieces. All I do is jigs, and then I'll use clamps to hold down other like jig fixture type stuff. So I can already tell you this is gonna drive me nuts, this being uneven like this, but all my fixtures and everything line up to these tracks, and I just don't have time to redo that all right now. So we're just gonna get this thing up and running because it's kind of been in limbo for the last week, and then probably within the next few weeks I'll spend a day getting this all redone, new, jigs and stuff made, but for now, this is what it is. But a few essentials for wasteboards that I like to have are this countersink bit. These are awesome. They're pretty expensive. I think they're like 30 bucks, but I've had this one for years. But at least perfect little countersinks every time for when you're putting these holes into here. Another thing is these self-centering bits, because like stuff like this, you want to get that directly in the center. If not, that screw's going to pull it one way or another. So this is just spring-loaded, and they're amazing for hinges and everything. I highly recommend getting some of these too. So let's get this temporary wasteboard installed. It's honestly not in bad shape. It's just uneven. I already hate it. And then for me to replace these wasteboards, all I have to do is shuffle around some of these T-tracks so it's even, and then just cut the MDF to size and just run a few CNC files, and it's pretty much it. I typically replace mine about once a year. I don't do a ton of cutting into the wasteboard. All right, so something else exciting. Onefinity sent me one of these diode lasers to try out. So I'm gonna use this for a few weeks, do a video on it, and then I'm just gonna send it back as I have 3 other lasers. The reason I asked for one was because I get a lot of questions on people asking me a recommendation on the diode lasers and if they are worth it. And honestly, I'm not gonna answer that question if I've never used one. So I'll do a dedicated video using this, installing it, and cutting and engraving stuff with it, or etching. I think it's a 40 watt or 50 watt? 44 watt. It does look pretty dang cool. So yeah, that'll mount to here, and you essentially will have a 32 by 32 diode machine, which is pretty cool. So I'm excited to use this and try it out. So future video, I'll hopefully get this done in like 3 weeks. Maybe, we'll see. Octo Pro. So this is the secret spindle. I can't talk about it yet. When I'm able to, I'll make a full video on it compared to other spindles. But prior, we had the Huyang 2.2 kilowatt water-cooled spindle on here. Honestly, it was fine, but I just don't really need water-cooled on this machine as I'm not running this one for super long periods of time. And honestly, air-cooled's fine for probably like 90% of people. My Elite Foreman does have a water-cooled Pone 2.2 kilowatt spindle over there, but that machine might be running all day long, which is where this machine comes in. I mostly do cutting boards and stuff like this, and these can take anywhere from 2 hours to 6 hours a board, depending on the design, and that machine might be running all day long. That's where this machine comes in, because that one's tied up all day. I can use this for like smaller projects, custom engravings, and more simple stuff like that. And then depending on like how many cutting boards I'm doing at a time, it would be nice to start running 2 at a time. I started making all my cutting boards on this one, well, the previous Journeyman one, and it was just fine, but now I've just kind of converted everything over to that machine, and it's just what I've been using, and that's just part of my routine. And I'm quite happy I made this smaller. We gained so much space over here, and it just feels a lot more open. I really almost went to the Machinist, which is a little too small for my needs. A 24 by 24 would have been perfect. I almost thought about cutting one down, but I just don't really need to do that, as the Woodworker is like perfect. It's 32 by 32, and for all my like secondary stuff, it's really just fine. So let's go ahead and get all this stuff done here organized, and then I'll give you a quick tour of both machines and show you any updates I've done to them and kind of how I have them set up. Then I quickly modeled a tray to contain my bits, and this is what we came up with. It's just a pretty simple design. Up here it holds the collets and just random stuff, and then all the bits I can fit in here. So bit containment, and then this is just like an accessory one for like my screws for hold downs. All my metal stuff, I just put on these magnets. I love these magnets. I recommend you get some. They just, you know, they hold my calipers and everything. You don't really gotta think about it. It's just always where I need it. And you do get dust down here. You know, it's a wood shop. Dust is flying everywhere, and you just gotta clean it up once in a while. But it would be nice if I could enclose this somehow, whether it's doors, maybe some cool tambour door, or just like some sliding plexiglass. I need to figure something out just to keep dust from building up in here, because it was pretty bad on the last machine. But yeah, that's pretty much it with this machine. I don't really have much more to talk about it. I should probably upgrade to a better screen, as this one's just so tiny. And I didn't really realize how small it was until I started using the Foreman Elite Masso setup. Honestly though, I do 99% of the stuff on like the big computer over there. All I really do is set my 0 with this, and then load all my files and everything with the computer. So it really doesn't bother me, as I'm just doing, you know, a few touches here and there, and then it's back to the computer. And on to touring the Onefinity Foreman Elite. I love this machine. I think it's a great machine. Do you need the Masso unit? No, but it is a pretty nice upgrade. I didn't have it when I started, obviously, because it didn't exist. I've had this thing since before it came out, since I got one of the first ones to test out, and it's been great. I haven't really changed much with it. All I've really done was add the beefy Z slider. No, I didn't. I had the beefy Z slider. I added the brake. They sent me the brake as just the water-cooled spindle is pretty heavy, so it was dropping when I would turn the machine off, which I was aware of it, so I'd kind of catch it when I hit the E-stop, and it would be fine. But the brake is nice because you just don't have to worry about that falling, because it's a little sketchy, as you don't want your bits to ram into the wasteboard or a workpiece. But yeah, let's come around to the front. Under here, it's an absolute disaster. As the other machine, I just need to spend like an hour going through it just to clean it up. I did add my little bit organization setup. I'll have to make another one because the Jenny bits come in these tubes and they don't fit in here. So we'll have to make a different setup that's a little bit wider. This is also just like random stuff. We did that at the AirWeights unit. That's all I really changed with my clamping setup, is integrating the AirWeights into my system. I did do a video on it and I'm getting a lot more comfortable with it and I really do like it. But as you can see, I just use a combination of jigs and fixtures. And then if it's any one-off weird stuff or my plugs, my cutting board plugs, I use this. I will do an update video on it eventually here when I get time. I got that new membrane to try out. I got this fixture and I got to put the membrane on here, but it's pretty cool. I really do like this. Spindle's the same, 2.2 kilowatt Pone water-cooled spindle. Works great, no complaints. And yeah, I think that's about it. I do have this new dust collector over here that I gotta get set up because I'm sick of looking at it and it's taking up a ton of space. And this is the first CNC post on the new channel. I made another channel to do more in-depth stuff. Like I have a bunch of bits from different companies where I can use this channel to deep dive into stuff like that or deep dive into stuff like this. And then the main channel will just be for like DIY projects, builds, and stuff like that. So this channel reviews different product stuff. Main channel builds and other projects. That's the end of the video, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We do have a Patreon if you want to support us that way. If not, we just appreciate you watching the videos. That is 100% fine. Leave me down video ideas in the comments and I'll try to make those come true and deep dive into those. Yeah.